talk about. Yeah, so what I will present today is a little bit of my latest work on signs, patterns, semiosis, and language. I put up a title on the slides. I don't remember the last word term I put, but we'll put it up pretty soon. So shall I share my screen?
Please go ahead.
I'll try and speak for 15 minutes to 20 minutes. So I'll be pretty, where's this PowerPoint? Here we go. Is that it? You have it?
Yeah.
Oops, why am I on thank you? No. Hop. I'll go back to the first. Chick. Yeah, so it's pattern, semiosis, and evolution. And I'll explore, let me close this, the role of patterns and semiosis in evolution and the capacity of organisms to understand their worlds for what it may mean, and investigate the limits of language as coordination tool to address complexity and knowledge fragmentation, or to integrate different knowledge bases and perspectives. So, oh, what's happening here? So about semiosis and semiotics, I'll do a little bit of debunking here. We know the European school of semiotics, this is Saussure, that mainly focuses on language and discourse, and ties signified and signifiers. But there's more interesting and opening lots of perspectives, the Persian semiotic school, the American school, that adds to the signifieds or the object or event and the signifier or the sign vehicle, an interpretant which actually involves a response. So there's action and agency that comes into the picture. And this is not then only applicable to non-intentional communication, but also to all living organisms. And as we have been asking ourselves several times, may it not apply to non-living systems as well? So here, why sign or pattern? I actually prefer using the term pattern here, although Peirce and all the semioticians use, or biosemiotic people use the word sign, because the pattern actually has some implications in the reality or in the phenomenology of everyday things that occur. They have a facet of being representations and signs of something, and they also are patterns in minds of what can be interpreted or actions. So they really embody the three aspects of the Peircean triadic sign. Whereas the term sign is often conflated with the actual sign vehicle, and doesn't have as many potential, let's say, than the word pattern. But for me, the pattern and the Peircean sign is a similar thing. So in here, the signal is actually, which is the sign vehicle, or which is the representation, the expression part of it is a cue or a clue that is cognized or recognized, and that mediates physical exchanges of matter and energy as triggers for action and transformation. And it's both a driver for a cue that is acted upon, or a manifestation of a behavior as a clue that is recognized as something experienced. So when it comes to asking ourselves if it applies to living systems, to non-living systems as well, well, we can ask ourselves whether any element that triggers a non-living system reaction or behavior can be considered as a signal as well, and be included in all this reflection or theory. And there's another, in the next slides, we can try and see if at some point, if there's some non-living system applications. So semiosis in this context is the set of sign processes that allow organisms to model and operate effectively in their environment, as making sense of objects or events in this environment, both in terms of meaning, what it is, what it means, and giving a direction through the action. So here we're back to Hofmeier and something you'll recognize, Tyler, which is key features of semiosis in living systems, being sophisticated networks of semiotic, like living systems are sophisticated networks of semiotic controls with biochemical, physiological, behavioral processes that enable systems to fulfill their needs at various levels. Semiosis mediates matter and energy exchanges through sensory motor processes. Most living organisms, all of them, have sensors and effectors that controls their behavior. Signals then are possibilities for interpretation, actualized into responses that become signs for next interpretations, and there are recursive and cybernetic processes that are key to adaptation and evolution. When it becomes too complex to manage, the organisms have nervous systems to manage priorities and conflicts. And the more complex the organism, the more semiotic freedom or possibilities and capacity for agency the organism has. Cumulative experience generates habits. The more a sign is acted upon, the more it can be anticipated. And so there's a learning dimension in it, and the fostering of new emergence of new capabilities that are generated within existing structural boundaries. And this is what is said to be triggering micro evolutions. But it can also channel and format, so freeze behaviors into patterns, as we say, another understanding of patterns that are difficult to get rid of. So here, going into Maturana's thinking, there's a and combined with Hofmeier, a congruence of habits among structurally coupled organisms and the formation of semiotic niches that Maturana calls consensual cognitive domains, where organisms co-adapt and co-evolve, and co-adaptations are eventually genetically integrated. So how does this play out within each semiotic niche? And you can call a species semiotic niche. Well, sign use generates or is connected with social interaction and with cognitive development. And in terms of change and evolution, well, language evolution, language evolves with sign use, and social complexity evolves via social interaction, and this generates cognitive improvements. So we end up with Hofmeier's steps in evolution of semiotic competence that Tyler had referred to last time, with two quotes first, one from Seebeck, who's one of the great ethologists and thinkers, scientists of animal communication. He says semiotic generates the capacities for a species to produce and comprehend the specific types of models it requires for processing and codifying perceptual input in its own way. So each entity or each living entity models its environment within the limits of what its structure enables. And from Hofmeier, Hofmeier considers that that natural selection is a result of semiotic processes because they are linked to teleological functions in life, such as feeding, escaping dangers, and reproducing, which are strongly triggered by signals. I have a whole set of slides of different types of signals in the animal world, but I won't get to this because it would take too much time. So in terms of evolutionary dynamics, there's within these cycles, or can we call them cycles? I don't know, but these recursions between communication systems, cognitive systems, and niche interactions, there's a continuum of micro and macro evolutions and steps throughout evolutions that connect nature, so the cognitive aspects, and culture and social relations. And language, human language, is part of these evolutionary dynamics, with proto-language 1 million years ago with Homo erectus, and actual language as we know it with Homo sapiens between 100 and 60,000 years ago. Sign processes, and Tyler was asking as a feedback of my paper, what is actually patterning in this what I call patterning, is that sign processes up to proto-language, so up to 1 million years ago, and up to the first humans, are what I define as patterning. Organisms were doing patterning, and humans continue to do patterning now. but language brought something more to it, language as we know it. So these sign processes are, patterning, I consider patterning as the processes by which signals are generated and interpreted, processed in the course of action and operation, rendering the actual moment to moment use and modeling of the dynamic environment, but only to the limit of what an organism can process and what it needs in order to operate. So this is what cells, plants, animals, infants, humans in action do. But humans evolved complex forms of this patterning, and this is what all humans share, epitomized in language capacity and language behavior. In French, there's a different word, which is langage, using languages as sign systems, being what we call langue in French. And there's often a conflation between the two. So I will maybe get back to that in the next slides. And I think, Tyler, that these sign systems are pretty close to what you call your alpha kits. So we can discuss this later. Are there any questions so far? Because I realize I've been going quite fast.
Could you go back two slides? I think just a quick clarification. Okay, one more. So this one. So
yeah.
No, one forward, please.
Yeah. Well,
so when you're talking about cognitive development and cognitive improvements, are we in the area of animals with nervous systems at this point?
Not necessarily, and this is a caveat that I was supposed to make at the origin of, at the beginning of my talk, is that I've put together several pieces of stuff that I've written, and there might be some anthropomorphization of terminology that that comes in the way, but here we are within the whole living system world. So the cognitive improvement and cognitive development is also about bacteria, or prokaryotes and eukaryotes, because it's their capacity to cognize, to act upon signals in order that enable them to operate. So when the bacteria, the E. coli bacteria, measures the content of sugar, the proportion of sugar in a solution it finds itself into, it triggers its propellers, or whatever it's called, towards the food source, towards an increasing concentration of sugar, for example. And this I call part of cognition. And we talked about it last meeting, that I think Gary was referring to that a bacterium has a part of consciousness. So here it's only cognition that I grant the bacteria, not consciousness yet. Did I answer your question, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay. So so what happened with language, with human language? And here's where I introduce the notion of languaging, which is not my notion, it's a notion of Maturana. The first step with Homo erectus is the emergence of a symbolic system, is a lexicon that humans started to compress signals instead of replaying through gestures scenes that instead of you say mimicking or miming things that could have occurred in the past, or making the descriptions in a very close to the actual playing out of the situation. They started to use shortcuts as words, for example, or other forms of symbols. And so this enabled to express longer thoughts and deal with greater volumes of information. And there was a pressure to process more data, basically, to process more information in order to be able to operate and, you know, run around in the steppes and but with step two came a syntactic system, and this was a spatio-temporal mapping of these different, let's say, compressed concepts. So there's an addition of a digital mechanism based on recursive combinatorial of discrete elements that emerged because there was a need for argumentation and verifiability of longer, more complex reports or accounts. And this is a line that has been developed by De Salles in France and Jackendorf in, I don't know if he's American, or, you know, Tyler, I don't know. And this brought
Yes,
us.
I believe so. He may have even been a student of Chomsky, but I'm not totally positive
really?
of that. I'm not totally positive.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not. Well, maybe, but he departed.
But Jackendorf has done some really interesting work.
Yes, really, because there's this. Yes, I forgot the term right now, but there's the theme, and there's building structure around themes, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
and so with language as we know it, so the symbolic system on one hand and the syntactic system, so the lexicon on the one hand, and the syntactic systems that gave humans infinite creative possibilities of expression and exponential learning, and push the limits of interpretation. But I'll show a little bit later how this became a form of liability. I mean, there's the other side of the, you say the medal, the reverse of the medal in English. I don't know, in French, there's an expression like this. So I'll focus mainly on the human symbolic system, because it's not actually the syntax that kinds of how can I say, divides humans apart. It's the symbolic. It's the symbolic part of it, or it's driven anyway by the symbolic part of it. So interesting work of Peirce is that he described, and there's been more work on this, more subtleties, but I'll get to to the simple, let's say, initial Peirce types of sign reference, is that he distinguishes indexical reference, which is basically what the clue, the track, or the manifestation that can be connected to the actual object or event. So, for example, if you take the example of a buffalo, the tracks will be an indexical reference, and the smell or the noise of it would be an indexical reference. That directly talks to the sense of the interpreter, let's say, to the sense and the memory of an experience of something. And then you have the iconic reference, which is more of a mimicking of a feature of what has been, what is being described. So in case of the buffalo, the horns can be mimicked, or the actual noise can be reproduced, or the picture of the buffalo can be painted in the cavern. But then comes the ultimate reference, which is the symbolic one, which is buffalo. And whereas the two first ones can be inferred by most anyone speaking any language, well, buffalo, if you don't know that buffalo is a buffalo, you can't really make a connection. So there's a shift from denotative or pointing to, from sign relation that point to things, or denote, or that are figurative or analogical, to connotative one that require a previous knowledge, or a history, or a learning before that. They're not clues in themselves if you get to them from scratch, and you haven't you don't just need the experience of the object or the event. You need to have the actual symbolic reference attached to it in the middle. So as it freed humans from the here and now, it did, and allowed multiple recursions and freedom in the thought process, and building more complex concepts, etc. It detached from the perceptual groundedness of language as patterning, as an orientational activity in the domain of what Kravchenko, speaking of Maturana, calls a domain of interlocked conducts, where, well, you speak, you use language in action to say, hey, look, the tiger, run faster, etc. But it's in direct connection with the event or with the experience that is being played out. So within a consensual cognitive domain, and here I'll get to two definitions from Maturana that I find very interesting, which is that what he calls cognitive domain is a domain of shared experience and cooperation. So meaning a domain or a context where the players or the agents have actually developed a shared experience because they've been operating together on specific things. And he adds the term consensual, but it's not consensual in what we understand consensual now. That means that we have an intentional agreement on it. It is consensual in a directly literal way, which means con together and sensual felt. So it's felt and experienced, felt and sensed, so experienced together, not necessarily consciously and intentionally, but within a domain of a consensual cognitive domain. The symbolic system is socially acquired, so that it's the semiotic niche, let's say, and its grounding into perceptual reality is externalized in the collective memory. It is not done immediately while the experience is being experienced. It is tacitly understood and reproduced because there's a history of personal and social and collective experience. So the tacit grounding that enables this detachment is operated during the child development, where the child reconstructs the relations to this higher levels of symbolic relation by reconnecting to the indexical and iconic relations that are more directly experienceable, and this is what we live regularly with our children. We show, we repeat, we mimic, we draw, and this is how they build the symbolic reference. So the interpretation process is supported by an ongoing familiarity with the symbolic relation and reinforced through learning, recursively shaped by and shaping the frames through which interpretation is made, constructing the consensual cognitive domain. So here I threw something that I had in another presentation that I find quite interesting, because it shows how the frames and the perspectives are built in connection to these signs. So there's a French philosopher called Bernard Stiegler, who died a few months ago, who had made some interesting work on Husserl's notions and concepts of retentions, is that he defines the primary retentions as the salient cues in the environment that the mind of some form of entity can perceive, consciously or not. Basically, we only notice what we have already noticed before, or what we have learned to notice, or what is salient enough for us to notice. And some things, as I showed here in my little yellow stuff, are left out. So we only retain as primary retention what we are able, what our cognitive structure, let's say, enables us to retain. And this comes to the secondary retention, because the secondary retentions is the filters or the funnel through which the primary retentions are selected, but these are made of the aggregate of the past primary retentions. So I don't know if my drawing is explicit, but from what has been selected in the potential signals out there, the ones that are primarily retained help construct the frames through which we will select further primary retention. So learning and experience and variety in experience is key here in order to broaden frames, for example. And then there's the idea of tertiary retentions, which are the tracks that we leave in the environment for others to process. So it's the whole cultural artifacts and the whole systems of social and cultural elements that reinforce the whole thing, creating what Dave Gray called self-sealing logics. And that's why we have our frames. So if you're a physicist, well, you'll retain things that are within your what you have historically experienced and manipulated. And it's the same thing for language and for knowledge. So we come back to another definition of Maturana that he calls language behavior as the consensual coordination of action within a cognitive domain. Consensual, again, here is sensed together. So we're together running in the forest, we're together on a baseball field, we're together learning, etc. And there's the exchange here that is experienced, felt together, not necessarily, as I already said, intentional or in agreement. And this is what we do every day when we act in the heat of the action. But what we do also in a natural way is we do languaging, and languaging is focusing on the way we use language, or focusing on our language behavior as objective itself of coordination. So it's a meta level or a recursion of language which enables the consensual coordination of the consensual coordination of action. And this is what we do to be more effective in our respective domains. So we as systems thinkers try to define, wordsmith ourselves to make our theories and our knowledge more crisp, more effective, more precise. But by doing this, we actually increase the divide with other disciplines or with other perspectives. So we can say that within consensual cognitive domains, we can set language, the focus on language behavior, or on the semiotic process itself as object of coordination. But forget about this little thing in between, the semiotic process. Maybe it's not relevant here, but we can focus on the language itself. Languaging helps shape and perfect the language behavior and the shared system of signs. So because it's already grounded in a socially constructed shared reality, it becomes transparent to the observer, like, fish in water, or in the cultural bubble or the self-sealing logic. Languaging is and can be effective for coordinating action in adjacent domains because nuances can be worked out. But what happens across cognitive domains, and this is where we have the Babel curse, we all try to talk each other into alignment or shared visions or shared values or shared languages across identity, experience, and knowledge domains. But how can it work when the cognitive frames and language systems themselves or sign systems are so different? So I think that there's two errors that are usually made, which is conflating language. So we say we want to solve everything in language, but as we see language as the human-wide semiotic capability that we have acquired through evolution. And we conflate this with the language langue as context or milieu dependent, which is ontogenetically or historically acquired through human development and experience. And we view language as being representational and denotative, pointing out to an external world that everyone can refer to, but everyone cannot refer to it in the same way. So outside of shared experience context, there's no shared perceptual reality or tacit grounding of the language, no support from historically shared experience or grounds for translation. So there's a need, and this is what I'm working on and maybe an evolutionary pressure for trying to find a way to reciprocally ground each other across symbolic systems using the semiotic competence and patterns and patterning in order to coalesce different forms of, and to integrate different forms of knowledges and coalesce different forms of agency. And I think, so I have several ways forward here, and I'm ending here. I hope I'm not too, I'm a bit late, aren't I? So the idea is to distinguish the two forms of patterning and languaging, and to try and work deeper at the semiotic process level and see how patterns can be used, and to develop a pattern literacy based on patterning process that could help systems, the understanding of systems and the modeling of systems and the rendering of systems. Your system is, George, is this, I think. And then use patterns as boundary objects to confront and relate the ways of knowing, to compare what patterns are you seeing, what do you feel, know, experience different from mine, and getting out of symbolism, values, visions, and things like that, and build the tools to enable that. So here's in a few words what I am up to, and I will stop sharing. How do I stop share? Here. Phew. Am I still here?
Yeah, you can still see your presentation.
Yeah, I can't. How can I get? I don't see my.
I can stop
here.
it.
Stop. Can you stop?
It should be at the bottom of your screen, but I can stop it as well.
Okay, please, yes.
There we go.
So I spent a little bit more than 20 minutes, but I'm sorry.
No, that was good. Should we ask some questions? And Tom, did you want to share something as well? Should we ask questions first and then go to Tom?
So it's very a bag of lots of stuff, sorry to say.
I've got a couple of pressing questions. Pardon me.
Yeah.
So real quickly, just a question on you're using Persian, and I noticed you had Terry Deacon's name listed, so this is getting fairly. Have you ever run across Thomas Sowell, what's his name?
Seebock? Thomas Seebock?
No, Thomas Sowell. I'll come up with it here in a moment.
Oh, Soa.
Yeah, Soa, yeah.
Yes, I have.
What?
I have.
No, Tomasello, George, right?
Not Tom. Also.
No, John
one word.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm trying.
Okay.
Michael, I think his name is, isn't it?
Yeah, I have the book.
Thomas, can you write it in the?
Yeah, I will. Well, it frustrates me. I move books around because I'm constantly going back to look at references and then I forget to put them back where they belong. Yeah, I'll write that in there.
Tomasello. Okay. Yes, I did hear about him.
Okay, because he has a very concise way of going from indexical to iconic to symbolic, along the lines that Deacon does. And by the way, guys, I'm trying to get Deacon for the conference.
Good.
He's a buddy of my co-author, and so my co-author is going to make a presentation in one of the Saturday morning sessions, and then I'm pushing him to try to get Deacon to and he to do a joint presentation in the special track. So I just thought I'd throw that out. Yeah, so I read your paper and I have been looking, at least as far as Wikipedia, discussions of semiotics and semiosis and so on. And throughout, I'm still asking myself, what's the difference between this and the realm of communications, information theory, and to some degree, cybernetics? It seems to me that we're really talking about the same phenomena. When you say signing, why isn't that the same as coding or encoding, I should say? When a message is encoded, whatever the alphabet is that's available to the system, which is the sender and receiver, they're putting that, the sender is choosing the symbols that it wants to send to the receiver. And the receiver is supposed to be affected by that.
Well, there's a difference, I think, which is that there's no necessarily a message that is emitted. So there's no necessarily a packet of information that is circulating. As we were talking last time, like seeing a difference, seeing a gap, seeing a change can be a sign. And then we're in a moment to moment thing. As we go, I put one step in front of the other. I have a step, I have a gap, I measure it's closer, it's in between, to me, the perception to operate, the sensory motor perception, and the information. But whereas Shannon information or theory of information is about, but I'm yet to run it through a little bit more in detail. It's like information is a matter which is different. Here it's embodied and embedded. There's a constant feedback. So it's more towards cybernetic, probably, yes.
Well, that all still involves information, Shannon information, but from the standpoint that, which is not clearly understood by most people, that information is a property of the receiver, and that's the affective aspect.
But yes, but
so the signing, I mean, I really could not distinguish in the language what the difference between producing a sign and in that triadic, system, you produce a sign, the sign is put out there somehow, and then somebody receives that sign. And if it's meaningful to them, you have an interpretant. If it's meaningful to them, then they're going to maybe have some reaction, right? But that's exactly what's happening in a communication system in which the sender and receiver are in they're in cahoots because they share the same alphabet.
Yeah. This relates back to, you know, what Robert Johansson is always saying. You know, he says that information is a choice. Well, he does, doesn't he? Yeah. And I get what he means. Yeah.
Well, I don't. I mean, I
You
do
just,
and I don't.
you just said it,
He's
George.
going,
Yeah.
huh? Listen,
You did just say it, I think. You know,
what?
you said that the information relies on the receiver. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's why Robert says that information is a choice.
Well, I'll tell you why I think he says it.
Yes.
It goes all the way back to the original derivation of information as the probability of an event occurring. And if there are only two possibilities, as in the flip of a coin, you have a binary choice. That's the language that Shannon used, a binary choice, and you resolve it. Somehow or another, Robert has turned that around and said that it's the choice made by the receiver, but that's not what Shannon meant.
Well,
Robert has a lot of very he got his education at some point in time, and I'm not sure he really has tried to keep up with things. I've got his book, and I read it through very carefully, and
Yeah.
he's got his way of looking at it, but
yeah.
I'm not sure that it's up to date.
Well, Helen and I are going to try and unpick that at some point in the future. I have been promising a meeting with Helen and Robert.
I don't really mind. I don't really care about the terms, actually. What I'm interested in is how it folds in together and how it is connected to evolutionary dynamics, and how the whole thing flows and works together. So whether you call it information or signal, and as I said, I'm not calling it sign. I'm calling it pattern, actually.
Yeah, I understood that.
So the interest of the pattern is that the pattern is an interesting, how do you say, handle in order to connect with systems as well, because and to connect, I mean, the isomorphies and the forms and the dynamics. So plus it connects the let's say the units of study that we may have, that many of us may have, with the formation of habits, with what's in the mind, and with also all the dimension of representation and expression. So I don't know if I managed to render that this complexity of having the reality, the representation of the reality, and the interpretation of the reality, and then the way we try to solve all that at another order of analysis by trying to understand the frames of other. I mean, there's lots in there that actually works into each other. But I picked this because to me, I actually, the day I came across this triadic relation and this Persian semiotic on the one hand, and then the biosemiotic that tied it to evolution with perspectives of maybe it applies, and it connected with Len's work and with Tyler's work, etc., and with your work, George, that I thought, wow, this is an interesting relationship to explore further. So I agree that my presentation at this stage is a bit of a juxtaposition of things that may seem unrelated, because it's not to a point where it kind of is well oiled and flows in a finished form. But yeah, but I don't want to, yeah, there are other, there's also Lynn's stuff too, but I just wanted to know if it was, if what I have presented is intelligible.
It is intelligible, but for myself, I just keep seeing the relationship between that and the more standard, I always shouldn't say standard, but certainly the one that gets a lot more attention in generally than semiotics does, and that is communication. And I see a one-to-one mapping on a lot of these things. I don't think there's that much difference. It is
Yeah,
just
but there is,
language.
yeah, but there is a way of I'm wrapping this stuff together that is not found in communication.
It's not, actually, it is found and the
Yeah.
discussion's deep. And I've been doing, over the last couple of years, I have written my information part and rewritten it
Good.
about 4 times because, as George well knows, right now, one of the hottest topics, a very hot topic, is information within, what is life and all that. And George was very helpful for me to help frame, reading his new stuff, to help frame it. And I've pretty much come to think, and you hit on some things that were very important, Helene. First of all, the very first paper that was such a big hit from Shannon was a theory of communication, not a theory of information. And Shannon said so too. And when I look at information, you're talking about the difference between signal and pattern. Signal is like an intentional thing from one thing to another thing. It's something that we've learned to pick up out there, or it's something that we've learned to pick up out there. Information to me now is the forming within. Its original term, the forming within. The information that's coming in, that is input that forms me, literally forms my brain, literally. It's literally forming me. If it's not literally forming me, and this is where, if I'm not somewhat surprised, and that's the language of information theory, then I'm not so much informed, So I see, just as you said, the difference between, so what we're getting out there are messages, but messages, again, assumes that what we're getting is input, and messages are intentional from someplace else. Do you know what I mean? It's something that we need to make these distinctions when we start talking. What is the difference between this and that and this and that? And it's so easy to, the language of information theory is loaded. It's been extremely useful. I mean, obviously, Shannon's work and his papers before that put together started the entire computer evolution, digital evolution. There's no doubt about that. Now we're at the point where the people talking about information now are the quantum physicists, are the people working on quantum computers and going, oh, and the other people are the ones that are looking at life and what is life in astrophysics. They're astronomers looking at what is life in the universe. And so the questions are different questions. So we start organizing differently, asking, okay, so So if you see information as any kind of change from the outside, any kind of change is information. And I pick up from the field, and now I get into neuroscience, and I can really, I've forgotten in the last couple of years a lot of the language I had around that. We're constantly, okay, I'm sitting in this room and I know this room. I'm very familiar with this room. I don't have to pay attention to this room. If that piece of artwork falls off the wall, I pay attention to that. That is information to me. It's informing me that something is happening. This room has already been, I already have knowledge of it. It's already structurally in place in my brain.
Yeah.
Those kinds of distinctions, and then those kinds of distinctions have to be are framed in neuroscience. You know, they are framed in neuroscience, and so a better description of what information is definitely needed out there. I really like George's description of information, and knowledge is the structure that is formed from being informed. Knowledge is the actual structures. And those happen to be attractor basins in a very chaotic forming brain. They happen to be, knowledge happens to be attractor basins of neurological populations, within neurological populations that go into chaos and form up throughout your brain, in the levels of your brain. So it's, to me, when I look at semiotics, I think there are, I pretty much agree with, I think, first of all, I think that it says a lot of things very clearly about dynamics that are happening. And I think that information theory is a little too, is not well articulated and formed in some ways too. And I think semiotics could lend some help to that. I'd love to have a ISSS, but it expanded from membership for sure, discussion of what is information. There was last year, there was a talk that was canceled, but then it was put online and I missed it, on what is information, out of Portland. And it wasn't about that at all. Everybody was talking about the problems of information for human beings, and, you know, the problems of that we're having, of the problems of echo chambers, and, you know, all the problems of internet issues and Facebook issues and all these kinds of things with information, and how it's splitting us. And the discussion wasn't where, actually in the NEXI conference, there are other people that are actually just discussing what is information, what is it, and how can we break that down. So anyway, I'm sorry, I've talked a lot, just about a lot of different stupid things. It's early in the morning and I'm functioning like, you know, but
I thought you did pretty well.
But bottom line, it comes down to me is a distinction needs to be made between messages, between change, what you're actually sensing as change, or what changes a rock, you know, as information. Is that rock being formed, formed within, and to what degree? And that goes into what is consciousness, and that George does that very well. He asked the question about what is consciousness in his writings, because it's not blurred line. That's where, what's her name? Sarah, I can't remember her name, talks about what is life. Life is on a continuum. It's not one day life happened like this. It's a continuum of what is life. So if you're describing what is life, then are you describing how something, or, as Tyler got into, how something processes what comes in, information in the relationship with outside? And how do we actually describe that? Blah. I'll stop.
So I put something in the chat, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but maybe this stirs some conversation, and might lead to some clarification. So am I right from what I've heard so far that data doesn't have a meaning, but has a meaning potential, and the meaning okay, I'll stop there, shall I?
Yeah, I read those, and I hate to say it, Gary. Go to I think it's chapter 9 or something in the book.
Okay, good.
Very detailed explanation of the difference.
Okay.
But in order to have
It's the
communication,
new one or the old one?
the old one,
The old one.
and it's expanded a little bit in the new one in chapter 2.
Mm.
So, I don't know where to begin. So, but the easy part of it is saying what data is.
Mm.
Data derives from a measurement process, or a generative process that takes a difference, as Lynn was talking about, a difference, and converts it into a stream of some kind that's modulated. So it could be digital, it could be analog, it could be frequency modulated, amplitude modulated. There are a variety of ways in which it is, but it presupposes that there is an observer that all can interpret the data itself, not the information, but the data. So there's a coupling between sender and receiver that says in advance, we're going to take some state change in the sender and transmit it over some communication channel. And just so you understand, I'm not talking purely about radio signals or something like that. Here's an example from real life. There is a butterfly whose species I cannot remember that has evolved to mimic, and this might be something, Helen, that you would be interested in. It has evolved to mimic the monarch butterfly in coloration and so forth, because the monarch butterfly, its form and everything, is a signal of poison to any potential predator, because it feeds from a milkweed plant, which is high in, Tyler, what's it high in? It's high in an alkaline of some kind. And it's basically at least untasteful to predators, but it often is going to result in the death of the predator. So this other butterfly has, through evolutionary learning, devised a way to actually mimic the monarch butterfly. And so any bird that's looking sees this sign, this signal that says, don't eat me because I'm poisonous. So this isn't pre-establishing, the sender and the receiver and how the data is going to be transmitted and all that kind of stuff. This evolved naturally, but it's affecting the same kind of dynamic, the same kind of, the bird sees this pattern and it is informed that there's a poisonous morsel there that you better not eat. And that's the meaning part. You really have to distinguish between the data stream itself, which is the message, the information, which is the quality of the message in terms of the newness or the difference that it's communicating, and the meaning, which is what's this going to do to the receiver? Is it going to change the receiver in some way or a particular way? The information quantity is based on the degree to which that message is going to change the receiver based on the receiver's a priori, if you will, understanding of the meanings of those messages. But there are three very distinct things. They have to be kept separate, and yet they're related. You see what I'm saying, Gary?
Yeah, I get all that. But are you really saying that data always has an intent?
It's not intentional. That butterfly is not intending to send it, but it has a means of signaling birds that, hey, don't mess with me. I'm not good to eat. It's not, it doesn't have to be intentional in the human sense. I think that's where we get really hung up. We always bring it back to what does it mean for human beings?
I'm not intending to do that. What I'm trying to get to is there a universal definition of data which is not related to simply our use of the use of the term?
Well, I think, Gary, that that this is very similar to what Helene is talking about as sign or pattern.
Yeah,
because she wants to say that the bacteria that is sensing, any organism that is sensing some aspect, some pattern in the environment to which it's responding by modifying its behavior in any way, which I agree, all life forms do that. You know, I think we probably all agree that living things to import and export effectively are going to be modifying where they are in the environment or rates at which they're doing something. So I think Gary, the way you're using the word data there is very similar to what Helene is using the word sign or pattern. And Helene, you're trying to, I do like the word pattern because sign can get into so much trouble, I think. You know, if it's not carefully defined, because people are going to be coming at it with, you know, this is a sign of this. You know, it's sort of hard to avoid the non-linguistic use of the word sign when you use the word sign in the broader way. But then pattern has its own difficulty because then everything is pattern. So, but it seems to me the thing that if I one heart of what you're doing is the difference between the linguistic what are we going to say, the linguistic aspect of the world that we're responding to and the non-linguistic world that we're responding to. I mean, this is really a core binary in what you're doing. So, you know, right now, spring is happening around me here on Long Island, and I can look out and see the trees, and I can know it's spring without even saying in my mind it is spring linguistically. So that's the non-linguistic sign, right? That's that. Now, so then also what I'm seeing in your work, you're trying to say that we have some problems in the world. You have an applied aspect of this direction you're going. And I think that can come out even more strongly. I think that's the really interesting part here, because you're saying, if I'm getting you right, that there's some aspects of the non-linguistic, are you were using, this is a little bit difficult because language is also patterning, but you want to use patterning as the non-linguistic at the same time. Is there sometimes a problem with that word, with the words there? Okay, so let me just use the word patterning to mean
Sorry.
to mean the non-linguistic, just to keep simple for the conversation right now, in linguistic to be on top of that. So you want to say that the patterning, by improving that, we can help solve some issues that are happening in the world. And some of this is what you referred to as George's systemese, or some people would say systems thinking. What Lynn is doing, or what we're all doing here, trying to develop systems thinking, which involves language, but sometimes it involves these visual, almost like icons. You know, Len makes icons. I made icons in meta patterns that are conceptual. So I don't know. I guess I'd like to hear you expand on that a little bit, because in the paper, you this was getting toward the end of the paper. And as I said, you continued putting in some new things at the end. But I think that this is really where you're trying to go, is and in
Exactly.
some of your previous papers, we did this enormous survey of pattern languages that you somehow see as really an important direction for us to be going with. Yeah. No.
I think I thought initially, I think we're being bogged down by trying to solve things in language, but not in the language of the close to the patterning thing. I shouldn't, I'm trying to make the connection that it's good to use language, but not languaging. It's good to,
Or you were,
like,
but I thought,
because we're kind of navel gazing into our own languages without connecting back to the ground. Is that we're off ground. So how can we solve? So I haven't cracked the nut yet. So I'm kind of pussyfooting around lots of different stuff, and I'm getting to weave something. I mean, you've sensed it, and
so how are we off ground?
Well, we're off ground because we cannot agree on a definition. We spend our time saying that we need to define things further, but the problem is that we have so many, and we alluded to that last time, to say that we have different perspectives of things. So we put boundaries in different places, and we name things in different ways. And this goes back to what Tom has shared on Garage Dagi's schema, where there was something about it's more difficult to integrate the different perspectives than to, I don't remember exactly the piece, is that and it was the same thing when I was studying movements or activist movements or social movements, is that everyone wants to coalesce action, but in the process of coalescing, it kind of looks at things from a very abstract and synthetic, not grounded stuff, like let's align on a value and then on vision, etc. And the energy is lost in the ungrounded stuff. I mean, I'm starting to put names on that, or to better point out to it. So my big questioning, and that's why I'm kind of very interested in patterns and the semiotic thing, is that it's low cognition. It's down to the bare bones of stuff. But how do we capture it? That's my questioning. How do we capture that?
Capture what? Again, capture what?
Well, how do we capture the rendering of the systemies or of the patterning stuff, of the patterns, without getting bogged down in trying to use or refine a language.
Okay, Helene, let me give you an example of why I've gone the direction I've gone and what you're describing.
Mm.
As a young nurse and as a young mother, I was extremely and somebody who dealt with families and children. I was very annoyed with the whole psychological, approach to children and families and mental health. I mean, I was well read and I was up to date, very annoyed with the approach. And it took quite a few years for me to come up with a different approach, a much more grounded approach, and an approach grounded more in how things actually work, grounded wise. And I mean the patterns that exist throughout nature. And that's exactly what you're talking about. When I'm in an argument with my teenager, say, that teenager knows exactly how to spike that argument, and I'm in a low mood and I'm tired, and we go back and forth and we go into a pattern, and it's a positive feedback or reinforcing feedback pattern. And the only way that's going to stop is somebody has to be a grown-up and do a negative feedback thing, stop it, negate the change. Now that works out true for going into divorce, going into world wars. It doesn't matter what it is. It goes into economic disasters, all kinds of disasters. It's the pattern that occurs throughout nature. Now those patterns happen in my interactions in my family, and they're grounded in real things. It's not philosophical. It's not psychological. It's not anything.
Not blah, blah,
Grounded, exactly. It's grounded in, this is what's going on. This is how, if I become conscious of this pattern, then I step back from it and I go, oh, this is a pattern. There are many patterns. There are many assumptions. We can't change. We're complex. A relationship takes a lot of time and hard work to change. And then you learn, oh, all you have to do is shift your response in some way and then everything changes. Aha, we're under some kind of mechanical, where I can show you, people called me from all over the place saying, oh, all I had to do was just stop doing this and everything changed. The whole relationship changed. And it sounds like terribly like common sense. Well, it's grounded in an understanding that is not mechanical, and it's grounded in an understanding about how nature works generally, with specific, very grounded examples. I'm not being philosophical. I'm not being psychological. I'm not talking from terms of, so now I'm able to describe political things, not politically or economically or socially or all those different ways, but by the actual processes going on, that kind of transcend all that mess. And that's, I think, what you're exactly talking about. So that's what I'm doing in my book, is describing those basic processes that that are relatively easily recognizable by anybody right now. They weren't so much 20 years ago. But even then, as you describe them, everybody knows what you're talking about, because that's what we consist of. That's what we see throughout nature. It's here already. It's how we're organizing things anyway. We just go off into our intellectual language mess, trying to talk to each other, and we go off into our massive specialized PhDs and miss the fundamentals. We just miss it.
So I'm trying to put some support, some scientific or let's say theoretical support into the development of this application. So you're right, Tyler, there's an applied aspect to that. That I want basically to find arguments to explain this, because otherwise it always goes back to, oh, let's try and find a language to express that. Well, no, let's try and find ways to compare and confront our patterns, or to compare and confront our modeling processes, or to see how we see and perceive things differently. What's the ground? What are we going to and so instead of focusing on assumed intentions or assumed ways of seeing things, or assumed meanings behind the words that we, but behind the symbols, or confronting our symbols, let's confront the nitty-gritty stuff of patterns, but in a kind of a scientific, scientific way. I mean, that's what mathematicians do. That's what physicists do. But how do you do that in application of systems thinking, system science, where you have to deal with the hard stuff, the physical, material stuff, and the cognitive, psychological, social stuff that are entangled together? Because systems right now, you have humans designing stuff that become out of hand, and you have humans using stuff, and you can't just look at your systems as something that is detached from any humans. When I was living in Boston, I went to what's his name, John Sterman's at MIT, was it?
Sturman, yes.
Yeah,
John Sturman.
Sturman,
the systems dynamic
Stella
seminars.
modeling, and
Systems dynamic seminars, and they were very, very interesting modeling and systems dynamic models about healthcare, and how do you understand when a cure is going to reach this or that. And at some point I said, but where do you take into account human behavior there? Because it was really something that, and I was told, oh, there's no need to do this. This is a negligible, or so, okay, all right. But then if we only focus on looking at things without humans and using language, I don't think we can really get to the actual challenge that we are facing. So of course we can design systems, we can engineer all kinds of things. Yes, it works, but can we really get to the the hardcore
Actually,
problematics of stuff?
let me give you an example of how a simple example. Networks in nature, pretty much their purpose is often distribution of information, matter, and energy to various parts, to the different nodes, to maintain the different nodes of a system, and if I can look politically at a country, I can look socially at a country, economically at a country, and I can get all involved with all the measurements and all the different data and all the different stuff. But bottom line, a healthy system means the distribution of matter and energy throughout its cells, throughout its whatever. And if a system is if all the wealth goes to X, to certain hubs, and doesn't go to the periphery, it's an unhealthy system. I mean, by definition, you can give me all the theoretical stuff you want, but distribution is to everybody is a healthy system. If now to say how that happens, we can show definitely through network effects how the rich get richer. It's a network effect. It happens throughout nature. You know, the rich, it's in the Bible, you know, in Matthew, and I'm not a biblical scholar, you know, but it's actual, you know, the rich get richer is an actual network effect. It is not a theoretical, it's not a moral thing. It's just what happens in unregulated networks, period. We can also see that we can also see with network effects that all you have to do is have everybody in the country kind of lean a certain one way or lean kind of a certain another way, run that, and you'll have two completely different diametrically opposed groups very quickly. That's the Schelling effect. It happens really fast. It's remarkably, it's like 20% agreement, you know what I mean? Tendency to agree with this person over here. Immediately, you know, really quickly, you'll get two giant conversive things. We don't understand the basics. We do not understand. We're just learning to understand the basics of this new global world and the interconnectivity. We're just
My first
beginning to
paper
understand
was
the
about
patterns that have been happening throughout time. We're just beginning to see it because we're just beginning to run it. And it's fascinating. We're extremely ignorant about patterns, extremely.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Right. So I would like to close in the not too distant future. And I think we're all going to have to do some reflection on this. And I'm going to read George's book again. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to, if Helen could answer the question from Tyler, if you've given some thought to that, and then I'd like to hear from Tom, who you know, always sits and reflects and you know, and I'd like to hear some wisdom from Tom. So Helen, you got the floor first.
Yeah, just in a few seconds. So Christopher Alexander wanted to capture the timeless ways of building cities, houses, etc.
Yep.
In order to become guides for future design.
Mm.
But the thing is that it morphed in a certain way from something that was meant to capture some actual knowledge, tacit knowledge, into something that becomes a rigid best practice and becomes a kind of prescriptive format document that became a bit disconnected from the actual multidimensional characteristic of patterns.
But just to get specific, what confuses me, I like the term a lot, and you use it a lot in your papers, but now it contains the word pattern and it contains the word language.
Yes, it does. And this paper actually was very focused on pattern language because it was for a pattern language conference.
Right. So, but is this so?
So it was a bit weighed too much on pattern language, but for me, it is necessary to develop a pattern languages meaning and a pattern literacy, meaning that we need to be able to express patterns, to capture patterns, to compare patterns, to compose and combine patterns to describe things or to model things in a kind of adaptive and discrete way, like we build language and not in closed model.
So, okay, so this is part of your solution where you want to go then. What
Yes,
you just said.
But
and is that languaging about, would this be called, in your terminology, languaging about pattern languages? or is it patterning about pattern? I see. I
Let's keep this for another discussion. I haven't thought it through.
Okay.
I acknowledge that there's kind of a terminology thing going on also because pattern language are for me narrower than patterns and narrower than languages. So let's listen to Tom and we can have a conversation about it if you want, because I understand that it's important for you.
Well, I'm just trying to, I'm fine for now.
No, but in your pattern work maybe, and I'd be interested to talk about it more, okay? But the key thing there is that I want to leave the blah, 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 and want to get to the grounded patternity gritty thing. Tom.
Well, I like Helene's presentation. One of the things that I got from it was the ability to imagine how a very sophisticated communication system could have evolved. So there's distinction. One of the things I've read about semiotics to some degree is codes, and there was not much talk about codes. But if you go back to the very primitive, you mentioned E. coli and sugar. There's no real code there. It's just a sensitivity that the E. coli developed at some place that was an advantage evolutionarily. So it learned to recognize something in its environment that was helpful to it. But that's much different from, say, DNA, where there is a code that connects a codon to a particular protein. And that had to develop later in the evolutionary path. So I see that distinction, but I can see how you went from an E. coli recognizing sugar up to the kind of discussions we're having now with the sophisticated language. And it's a long path, but very interesting. So it gave me a deeper insight into that.
And I think that the coding, the code or not code is a contentious topic in the biosemiotic world or domain. That there are contentions and confrontations and conflicts about this, about people who think it is only a code and people who take in more, let's say, not intuitive, but like potentialities and things that are more fluidity, let's say, to it than something that is. But it's still something I'm working on. Haha. Anyway, thank you for listening.
It's been very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
we still have 5 minutes, so I don't want to monopolize.
Final thoughts.
Yeah.
My suggestion is that there might be something fruitful in trying to align semiotics with the more conventional. The comments about code, I think there's a problem in actually how you understand what code means. And so a concentration difference that the bacteria, say, swim along the gradient, that constitutes a kind of code insofar as the bacteria is concerned. So it requires, we always think in terms of human communication systems because that's what we know, telephones, telegraphs, all that kind of stuff. But in nature, there's a wide array of these things that actually fit into that same categorization.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I guess I would like just to iterate some of the questions where you think you're going, with this grounding. I'm so curious because you're seeing something and I want to know what it is you're seeing. So just for the future, just for your future.
You don't want me to answer now?
That'd be
because
great
one
if
of my-
you could do it in
Well,
2
one
minutes.
of my first papers, I tried to develop a system interpretation elements that I called patterns, or, you know, it was really the beginning is 6 years ago, with little icons that could help people on the fly compose patterns and sequences and systemic workings. And in my paper, Lynn, I did talk about winner takes all and Matthew effect and network effect and all kinds of things. And my goal was to try and crack, you know, to bring to light and let people interpret what was the things that were playing out around us, what we were actually being hit by, you know, systems that take a life of their own and bang us on the head, basically. So I'd really like to see. I'm not sure I'm knowledgeable enough on modeling languages, modeling system. I would like one of my next steps to try and see what's out there that could help me accomplish or help see how we can create something that would be some form of adaptive modeling in a way that wouldn't be very like it's a model and this is cast into iron, into bronze, but something that could help mutual interpretation and co-grounding of stuff before maybe putting this into more formal ways. It's just like natural language is not as formal as that, but it helps work out lots of things. So how can we have a level of patterning or a level of combining, composing, seeking, understanding patterns to explain what is going on, situations, well, patterns that are bogging us down, so, you know, psychological patterns, illness patterns, pandemic patterns, economic patterns, mind patterns. I mean, there are patterns everywhere, everything. So we say everything is a pattern. Well, maybe, but also patterns are things that you can identify as a system at work and as a manifestation of a system at work. And if you try and move around, and it's like a hacking language to understand systems in a way, something like that. And I think your alpha kits are, I have the feeling that the notion of the alpha kit is kind of interesting there. You don't seem very happy.
Well, that would be yeah. It's yes. Basic. I mean, even what Lynn's doing with these basic chapters of her book are in a way a kit to assemble understanding or something like that. I do see that.
Yes.
I do see that.
Let's build something like that.
In
Together.
George's systemese, and yeah.
Let's build a systemese, George, based on patterning.
You're on mute, George.
All right. I said I'm working on it. And, there is a kin system dynamic modeling language that includes modularity and agent-based you can invoke agent-based models so that you can, at least in some limited way, put the human factor back in, depending upon the agents are fairly simple as well. They can be as complex as you make them,
Yeah.
but that is, and I can't remember the name of the language. I'm sorry.
It's a net
like,
logo. Net logo does that, doesn't it?
Is
Net,
it NetLogo?
You
Net
can-
logo
I-
has some
Yeah.
agent-based things, but
NetLogo has a whole library full of social and
does it
Yeah.
have system dynamics as its core? though?
yes, it
Yeah,
has,
it's
it has
core,
systems
really?
dynamics in it. It has a number of things in it. Complexity explorables are a simple thing. They don't have systems dynamics in theirs. But yeah, you can find all kinds of feedback effect things.
Mm.
Complexity explorables is a relatively new thing. It came out of SFI, out of Santa Fe Institute.
hmm.
And
Oh,
it's
it's
fun.
different.
Yeah. I just
Hmm.
put it in chat before we were all talking about it.
Explorables, because I knew Complexity Explorer. So
No.
they launched Complexity Explorables.
Complexity explorables, if you search for it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I see it. It comes right up.
Yeah,
Okay.
just look at their little models and you can play around with all the different
A
things.
collection of interactive explorable explanations. A collection of interactive explorable explanations of complex systems in biology, physics, mathematics, social sciences,
Well, that's
epidemic.
cool.
Yeah.
That
But
just-
didn't exist.
if you
That's
go to the actual page of what they are, it's really fun. It has simple explanations, and then they're all attached to the more complex papers with the mathematics. But it's
Wow,
fun
cool,
to play around with them.
Yeah, very cool.
cool.
And it's fun
Mm.
because I'm able to, it's all Creative Commons open. So I'm able to take screenshots of it and put it in my book. And I've been able to put it into most of the chapters, an example from each. So
Cool.
it's really easy to do. And there's an example for everything out there in the modeling already.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, like I said, couldn't have written what I'm writing 20 years ago. But it's really easy to do it now. Yeah,
Tom needs
it's
to see
really easy
this.
to do it now.
Some good stuff here, Tom. I'll put it in the chat. Complexity Explorables. You need to go and have a look.
Yeah, very good. So I
Yeah.
had to go and read the chat because I missed half of it.
Yeah, that's me too.
Yeah. Well,
Lynn, can you send me
I could-
something on
I
your
I can send you the
information?
chat, and I will post the video as usual.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, I'm working on Synergy this week. I'll jump over to information and write it.
Yeah,
We'll
that'd
do
be
it.
good.
Okay, and do you have anything to send me already or no?
Yeah, I could send you stuff.
Okay, cool. And then we can talk.
But you know what? If instead I have a little mini writing group. So if I make my goal to hit my writing group this week with information, then I can give you something better,
Cool.
more cohesive.
Yeah, anyway, I'm full, I have to.
Okay. Right. We're going to stop the recording.